Hi, welcome to Melissa's Money Mindset. Today, we're talking all things credit. So first, we'll start by talking about how you can get a free credit report. Then we'll talk about how to improve your credit if you need to do that. And finally, we'll talk about why having good credit is so important. Now, if your credit is subprime, believe me when I say that you're not alone. Actually, over 40% of consumers have a credit score of less than 700. Now, everybody's circumstances and conditions are unique to them. So my goal today and my hope for this video is just to show you and for you to help educate yourself about how to make better financial decisions for the future and set yourself up for success. However, credit scores don't change overnight, and this is a really important point that I wanted to bring up right at the beginning of this video. There are tons of services out there that promise to raise your credit by X number of points overnight or within 48 hours or within the week. Don't fall for those. Follow the steps in this video. You'll usually see a slight increase in your credit score within 30 to 45 days, but depending on how much damage has been done to your credit score, it could take months or even years to recover your credit to a prime level. Now, that being said, the good news is this is all fixable. So let's get right into the details. But before we do, if you could please do me a huge favor and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you never miss another money-making tip. Let's get right into it. So what is a credit score? So it's basically a prediction of your credit behavior. It predicts how likely you are to repay any current loans that you might have. And it also predicts what kind of relationship you're going to have with your credit in the future based on your credit report, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So now let's talk about what factors influence your credit. So I'll pop up a graph here just so that you can kind of visualize this pie chart that I'm talking about. 35% of your credit score is made up by payment history. So basically, this is your bill paying history. Do you pay your bills on time? This is the most impactful portion of your credit score. So even if you're 30 days late, 60 days late, or longer, having a late payment will absolutely kill your credit score. So if you have any late payments, we'll talk about how to handle those. Just know that moving forward, it's very important for you to pay your bills on time. Otherwise, it's really going to impact your credit. The second section here is amounts owed, and that makes up 30% of your credit score. So any current unpaid debt, if you have a mortgage, if you have an auto loan, if you have any outstanding student loans, any debt that you have is counted in this category. Then the next 15% is made up of length of credit history. So how long you've had certain credit lines open, how long you've had a mortgage or an auto payment for, those type of things. So if you have a credit card that you had open since you've been 18 years old, you've been making on-time payments, that's really beneficial to your overall credit score. So just continue to keep that open. That is helping you. 10% is new credit. If you've had any new credit checks, so if you're trying to buy a house or trying to buy a car and you're trying to get approved and kind of shop around for the best rates, you'll often see new credit inquiries, and that can affect your credit score. And finally, the last 10% is measured by credit mix. So they want to see that you have a good mix of revolving debt and installment debt. So revolving debt means credit cards, basically where you have a revolving line of credit. You basically charge an amount to your credit card and then you pay that off at the end of each month. And then the next month you start with your full credit limit again. It's a revolving line of credit. Now, an installment debt is like a house or student debt or a car where you're paying a fixed amount each month. You're installing a payment each month until you have paid for that item in full. And so by now you're probably wondering, why is having good credit so important? Why is everybody always asking me what my credit score is? And that's because lenders look at this information all the time. If you have poor credit, you're actually less likely to be able to even rent an apartment. I personally own multiple investment properties, and I actually check people's credit score just to make sure, again, that they pay their bills on time, right? I want to make sure that I'm being paid rent. So actually a lot of landlords now are looking at credit scores when they are determining whether they should accept or deny a potential tenant. So if your credit score is low, there could be a minimum credit score requirement for any property that you're looking at. And so you could be declined to live in that property just based on your credit score alone. Having good credit is also really helpful if you're trying to buy a house, buy a car, take out any student loans. Having a good credit score makes you much more likely to be approved for those loans in general. And if you are approved, it also makes you much more likely to get a favorable interest rate and a favorable loan term. So you could be, for example, buying a $30,000 car at a better interest rate than somebody with poor credit, and you're paying less for that car over time, basically being rewarded for having good credit. Now, you might be asking, who is determining my credit score? Where are these numbers actually coming from? So those are great questions. There are 3 credit reporting agencies in the United States. Those are Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. Now, basically, these 3 companies aggregate all of your credit data every month. They basically take a look at all of your trade lines. So all of your trade lines are any credit cards, home, auto, student loans, any kind of credit that you have is considered a trade line. And they basically will consolidate all of this information about if you're paying on time, how much you're paying, how long you've been paying on the loans for, and they'll package that all into a credit report that you can actually see online. Now, I also wanted to note here that it's important that you go and get a credit report from all 3 of these credit reporting bureaus, because your credit score can actually be different between the 3 of them based on how heavily they weigh certain items against others and exactly what they're looking for. So to get the best picture of your credit score, it's really important to get a credit report from all 3 of these bureaus. So step 1 is, how do I get a free credit report? So I highly recommend that you go to annualcreditreport.com. They are an official website authorized by federal law, and they are required to give you at least 1 free copy of your credit report per year. Now, that might have updated. I believe after COVID, you can actually get a copy of your credit report more frequently, but make sure that you're going to that website, and you can easily get a credit report from all 3 credit bureaus. Now, you can also go to myfico.com. This is basically what lenders look at, and I think there is a small fee for this service, but it's very accurate, and it basically shows you what mortgage lenders are going to be looking at. Now, there's plenty of other websites if you want to check those out. There's Credit Karma, Credit Sesame, and CreditWise by Capital One. Now, personally, I'm able to see just my credit score, not my full credit report, but I have a Chase card. And so each month when I log in, I think this is true for most major credit card companies, I can actually see my credit score from directly inside their website. So each month when I log in and pay off my credit card, I also just make a habit of checking my credit score. This is really helpful because say my score goes up by 5 points one month, or maybe it drops by 2 points one month, it will tell you exactly why it went up or why it went down. Maybe my utilization was a little bit higher one month over the other, but it's really nice and especially important to make a habit of staying on top of your credit score, especially once you fix it. Now, it's also important to point out that there are a few different kinds of credit score. So most commonly used in the United States is called a FICO score, and that's used by about 90% of lenders in the US market when making a lending decision. Now, this can range anywhere from poor credit at less than 580 to exceptional credit, which is typically above 800. The other type of credit score is called a Vantage score. It's much less common than a FICO score. Not that many people use it, but it's still important to point out. So their scoring is actually quite different, and it ranges from 300 to 850. All right, moving on to step 2. So once you have your credit score and your credit reports, I would highly recommend going through them with a fine-tooth comb. Now, the easiest way for me personally to do this is to print them out physically and have a highlighter ready, go through anything that you see that you don't recognize. Maybe you have a late payment, maybe you were sent to collections. Any discrepancies that you see, maybe you see a credit inquiry that you didn't authorize, highlight that and we'll check that out in the future. So now that we have our credit report highlighted, we have to organize. So I want to address these things in order from most importance and the most impact that they have on your credit score to the least impact that they have on your credit score. So we're going to go back to that pie chart that I talked about at the beginning of this video, and we're going to start out with payment history. So even if you see things on here that are 30 days late or 60 days late, those might not seem like a big deal to you, but these are actually huge deals and are killing your credit score. So make sure to address these first. So the first step here is determining if your payment is actually late or not. So if when reviewing your finances, you determine that you actually did pay that bill, I recommend calling up whatever company it is, say it's your cell phone company. And if you're in a state where you only need one party's authorization to record the phone call, I would highly recommend doing that. And basically explain the situation to them. Say that you got a copy of your credit report online and you see that their company is reporting that you had a late or a missed payment. And that when reviewing your own financial records, you came to find that you actually did make that payment and you have proof that you can show them. Now, a lot of the times they are agreeable and they'll help you with this. And if they're really nice, they'll even reconcile that and remove that from your credit report. Now, if they're not so agreeable, the next step would be writing a letter. So this is technically the more legally official way of doing things. And usually you can get more responses back and forth rather than just calling somebody on the phone or live chatting somebody and just getting a no and having the conversation shut down. Now, if they're still not agreeable to remove this from your credit report, you can file a dispute. So a dispute will basically take about 30 days, and it will basically put the burden of proof on that company. So on the cell phone company, saying, prove to me that I didn't pay this bill, even though I've given you proof that I did pay the bill on time. So they will have 30 days to respond to the dispute. They either have to validate that the debt still exists, or they have to reconcile that from your credit report. Now, if you truly did not pay a bill, if you have the money to do so, I highly recommend paying that bill in full, or at minimum, calling the company and getting on a payment plan, because that will show them that you want to get back in good standing with them. And then the next step would be to ask for a goodwill deletion. Now, this is basically asking, say, your cell phone company, hey, if I pay you back in full, which I can do right now, could you please delete the history of a late payment from my credit report, because it does have a big impact on my credit. And most of the time, as long as you're paying the amount in full, they will be agreeable to that. Now, if you've been sent to collections, that's a little bit of a different story. Now, if you believe that you've been sent to collections by fault, then you can do the same thing and you can dispute being sent to collections. Now, you'll have to provide a reasoning, either showing proof that you paid a bill or any other proof that you might have. Oftentimes, this will be completely forgiven and just removed from your credit report. Now, the important part I also wanted to note here was if being sent to collections shows up on all 3 of your credit bureau reports, you'll have to file a dispute with each credit bureau to make sure that they're removed from all of them. If you removed that from just your Experian credit report, it'll continue to show up on the other 2 credit reporting bureaus' reports, and those will continue to affect your credit score. Now, if you actually have been sent to collections for cause, you can ask them to settle for deletion. Now, the way that collection agencies work is that they basically purchase your debt from your creditors for pennies on the dollar, meaning that there probably is some wiggle room and you might be able to negotiate with them. Say you have a $100 outstanding cell phone bill, maybe you could negotiate to pay $40 or $50 instead of the full $100, and basically whatever amount that you pay is just profit for the credit agency. So settling for deletion basically means that you and the collection agency have come to an agreed price of what you'll pay them. And then once you pay that amount, they will delete that from your credit report. Again, another important thing to point out here is to make sure that you get this settle for deletion in writing. So a lot of companies will say, oh yeah, sure. If you pay us, we'll definitely delete that from your credit report. And then of course they don't. And you have paid now your bill in full and your credit score is still being affected by it. So make sure that whatever you do, get it in writing. Now, there might be some of you that said, oh, I already settled and I paid my bill with the collection agency, but I forgot to ask them to delete it from my credit report. That's okay. Don't panic. Oftentimes, you can just call the collection agency and they will be kind enough to remove it from your credit report. The worst that they can say is no, so it's definitely worth asking. And if they do say no, I honestly would just try to call back and speak with somebody else. Maybe whoever you spoke to is having a bad day. They're not in a good mood. Typically, they want to help you. Now let's move on to the second part of our pie chart, amounts owed. So let's take a minute here to talk about credit utilization. So that's basically how much of whatever credit line you have open are you using. So say you have a $10,000 credit limit on your credit card and you're using $6,000 of that each and every month. That means that your credit utilization is 60%. Now, that's incredibly high. Just because you have $10,000 to spend doesn't mean that you should. Typically, people recommend to try to keep your credit utilization under 30%. So that would be $3,000 used of your $10,000 credit. Now, I personally have seen a huge difference if I keep my credit utilization under 10%. So I actually try to keep it even lower than that if I can, anywhere between 2% and 5%. And that's where I typically see my credit increase the most. Now, another question that somebody might have is, well, should I just stop using my credit card altogether? And actually, the answer is no. Credit bureaus and creditors like to see that you're responsibly using the line of credit that they're giving you. Even if you're just spending $100, $200, make sure that you pay that off, obviously, at the end of the month. But they would rather see that you're using your credit responsibly and you're using it month after month. So for example, I have a credit card that I use that I literally just put my $45 per month gym membership on, and I just pay that off every month. So those were the two main sections of the pie chart that I wanted to talk about. But obviously, length of credit history. If you are young, this is something that's hard to fix. Obviously, I can't make you older or make your lines of credit older. Say you have a credit card from when you were 18 years old. I highly recommend keeping that open as long as you're paying it off. Even if you're charging $10, $50 to it per month, that is still helping your overall credit score. So this other 10% of the pie chart is new credit. So it's made up of new credit inquiries, whether that's coming from you applying for a new credit card. I wouldn't recommend going out and applying for 10 credit cards all at once because those will likely be hard inquiries into your credit score. Also, I wouldn't recommend buying a new house every month or every 2 months or buying a lot of new cars in a short period of time and financing them because those are all things that will impact your overall credit score. And finally, this last 10% is made up of a credit mix. So we had talked about installment debt being your mortgage, your auto loans, any student loans, anything that you pay the same amount for each month. They like to see installment debt mixed in with revolving debt. Revolving debt being your lines of credit, your credit cards. In terms of revolving debt, it's really important that you pay this balance off in full each month. Otherwise, you can get yourself in trouble paying astronomically high interest rates and things can quickly spiral out of control. So my two main recommendations from this section of the video are to address any late payments and to keep your credit utilization low. So the third step of this video is to get creative in ways to improve your credit score. My number one tip would be to find a sponsor or a supportive person in your life that would be able to add you as an authorized user to their credit card. So for example, your parents, maybe an aunt or uncle, a sibling, somebody who obviously has good credit and is good with finances already. They can even add you as an authorized user on their credit card and never give you a credit card if they're worried about things getting out of control. They could even cut up your credit card. As long as your name is associated with them, they're good credit. And then especially if they've had that line of credit open for a while, you're basically benefiting from them and their financial responsibility. Now, I've heard of just doing this, boosting some people's credit by up to 100 points. Now, to get to that 100 point mark, you might have to be added to multiple of their credit cards. But even if you're just added to one, that could significantly increase your credit over time, especially if they pay their bills on time, they've had their line of credit open for a while, and they have a high credit limit. My second recommendation is to file disputes. So if you believe that you've been sent to collections or you've been charged a late fee, make sure that you're filing disputes and having these things removed from your credit report. This will have a huge impact. So if you believe that you've been falsely reported as making a late payment or being sent to collections, again, make sure that you're filing these disputes because then basically the burden of proof falls on that company to prove that you did not pay your bill on time. And if they can't do that, then they will have to remove that negative history from your credit report. My third tip is to remove hard inquiries. So oftentimes if you go in to buy a new car, the salesperson will actually say, "Oh, hey, can I have your name and your social security number? And I will try to find you the best rates on your new car loan." So sometimes when they do this, they'll actually be shopping your credit around to a bunch of different lenders. And unfortunately, that can result in multiple hard inquiries to your credit score. Of course, that will have a major impact on your credit score. It could drop your score anywhere between 30 and 100 points. So if you didn't actually sign anything, then you never actually gave them permission to do those hard credit pulls. So if you didn't sign anything and you have all these hard inquiries on your account, you can again dispute those and get those removed. Now, if you don't get them removed, they will stay on your credit report for 25 months. So basically everything that's reported to your credit report stays on your report for 24 months and then it falls off in the 25th month. So this could have long-lasting implications for your credit score. My fourth tip is that if you're using your credit cards for any business-related debt, stop. I have an entire video dedicated to this, but you should be keeping your personal finances completely separate from your business finances so that if your business goes under, you're not personally affected by it, you're not personally having to declare bankruptcy, and your credit score will not be affected. Now, feel free to check out my other video, which will help you figure out how to open a business line of credit and how to build a good business credit profile. My fifth tip is to maybe consider paying your credit card off twice in the same month. So say that your credit card payment is actually due on the first of each month, but when you go to look at the statement, the closing date of each statement is on the 15th. So that means that whatever your balance is on the 15th, that's what's being reported to the credit bureaus. So say you had a $10,000 credit limit and you were using all $10,000 of that on the 15th. So that means 100% credit utilization is being reported to the credit bureau, and that's going to tank your credit score. So if you need to use a higher amount like that, consider potentially paying off your credit card twice a month so that on the 15th, when that number is reported to the credit bureaus, they see very low credit utilization. My sixth tip is to set up auto payments. So we all have plenty to worry about in our day-to-day lives, and sometimes you're late or you forget to pay a bill, and it's not because you don't have the funds in your account, it's just because you forgot to log in and pay the bill. Completely understandable. That happens to all of us at some point. So the easiest thing, and what I do for all of my accounts, is to log in and just set up auto payments. This is super quick, and then it can just be deducted from your account each month. Now, I also want to mention, you shouldn't just rely on auto payments. Make sure that you're still logging in to your credit cards each month and going through all the statements, seeing if there are any charges that you don't recognize, if somebody stole your credit card, anything like that. You should still be paying attention to your credit card statements. My seventh tip is, even if you're just renting whatever place you're living in, that can still be reported to the credit bureaus. You just have to request for that to happen. So for example, I've used Zillow Rental Manager in the past to pay rent and to pay my bills, and they actually do have a feature. You just have to go in and enable it. So whether you're using Pinata or Self or Zillow Rental Manager or any of those types of payment processors, that should be an option, and you should get credit for paying your rent on time. My final tip here is to ask credit card companies for a credit limit increase. Now, this is probably more likely to happen if you've been paying your credit card on time and in full. If they see that you've had a really good credit history with them, you've been paying your bills on time, then you could ask them to raise your limit. Say you have a $5,000 limit and you want them to raise your limit to $7,000. They could say, oh yeah, we've been seeing you pay on time. You're continuously using your credit card. You're making responsible financial decisions. Of course, we'll raise your credit limit to $7,000. And now the other benefit is that your credit utilization will be lower. So you'll be much closer to that 30% utilization or that 10% utilization that we had previously talked about. However, an important thing to note here is that usually when you ask for a credit limit increase, this will probably show up as a hard inquiry on your credit report. And that's okay. It's just a temporary ding. You'll probably see your credit score drop by just a few points, and that's completely okay because your lower credit utilization will pay off in the long run. So those are all of my tips for improving your credit score. Now, unfortunately, fixing your credit score isn't going to happen overnight. It often means learning some hard lessons and then also implementing healthy financial habits. If you're utilizing the things that we've talked about in this video, you should definitely start seeing improvements in your credit score within 30 to 45 days. Now, I will say that recovering from things like a hard credit inquiry, so taking out a new credit card, opening a home mortgage, or getting an auto loan, typically happens much faster. I'm talking about just a few months, but if you had some more serious things and you were in a more dire financial situation to begin with, maybe you had multiple late payments, you were sent to collections multiple times, perhaps you had your home foreclosed on, or you even had to declare bankruptcy, those things typically take 1 to 2 years to correct. And then after 7 years, even a foreclosure, that is the longest thing that will impact you, will fall off of your credit report. It's also important to note that any new issues will have a much greater impact on your credit score than older issues. So say you paid your credit card late 2 years ago, that's going to have a very minimal effect on your current credit score versus if you didn't pay your credit card last month. So the most important part of all of this is that it's fixable. So stick with what we've discussed in this video. Sit down and take a good, honest look at your finances. Make sure that you're going through and paying off all of your bills each month. Make sure that you're keeping your credit utilization nice and low. Make sure that you keep older credit lines open and avoid taking on any unnecessary debt. Now, if this video was helpful to you, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Share it with anybody that you know is also struggling to improve their credit score. I think this information could be beneficial to pretty much everybody. As always, feel free to drop a comment down below. I would love to hear from you on your credit score journey, and feel free to follow me on my social channels right here. I will see you in the next one. Bye.